much more exciting. So I just say to the parents, look, you're a generation away. What you've got to be careful of is your kids are going to overtake you very, very fast. They understand the new world actually, where everything is converging. You know, marketing is converging, advertising, programming, schoolwork. It's all a completely different new generation. So yeah, I'm afraid I'm an ardent commercialist for the future.
So let's go into the state of hypnosis again.
Okay. This woman is undergoing hypnosis to treat amnesia. Is she about to be cured of a phobia?
3, breath out, eyes relaxed, body.
Remember a dark secret, or return to her past life?
How old are you, Sandy?
I'm 6.
You're 6, huh?
Mm-hmm.
I see. Yeah, what makes them say you're a pain?
Because I make messes and they don't want to play with me.
Horizon, pure science, sheer drama.
A ruthless lawyer rediscovers life and love after a shooting. Harrison Ford stars in the film Weepy regarding Henry on BBC One shortly.
I spy with my little eye something to begin with.
Remember, sparklers are fireworks too. Keep an eye on kids with sparklers. And don't get them to under 5s.
This is BBC Two with Jeremy Paxman and Newsnight.
I'm disabled. I've done everything I can to provide for my retirement. Tonight, this government says that if I become too sick to work, I'll be financially worse off. Where's the justice in that?
The government got its way and forced through the Commons its plans to cut disability benefits tonight.
The ayes to the right, 325. The noes to the left, 265.
But with over 50 Labour MPs rebelling, opponents in the House of Lords believe they have the moral right to block the government again. Have they? 10 years after the fall of the Berlin Wall, how come East Germans are nostalgic for the good old days of communism, the Trabant and the Stasi secret police? Just the sort of clothing some employers are insisting upon, as women are suspended from work for wearing trousers. We talk with the fashion designer Jasper Conran about when men might wear skirts. A titanic tussle's in prospect between the government and the House of Lords. Ironically, it's the Lords who threaten to wreck a piece of Labour government legislation because it's not, in the traditional sense, left-wing enough. The plans for means-testing disability benefits did get through the Commons tonight, although with the government's majority cut to 60. But hostility to them is undimmed, and the size of the rebellion in the Commons seems to have given opponents in the Lords a fresh wind. Mark Mardell is at Westminster.
Yes, Jeremy, after all the cajoling and the concessions, the last time that this was in the Commons, the rebellion was in the high 60s, now it was down to the low 50s, and that is enough to embolden the Lords, I think, to defy the Commons yet again when it comes back to them on Monday. Perhaps one of the most interesting aspects of this is the way that, behind the scenes, ministers are threatening those hereditary peers who expect to keep their seats under what's being called the Weatherall deal, saying, well, if you don't play ball, you're really not going to have a job to go to. But Labour MPs feel extraordinarily uncomfortable about all of this. One loyalist who certainly voted with the government tonight said, for all the good we're doing, and he did believe that they were doing good for the disabled, it looks like we're kicking away their crutches.
Our reforms won't
the Prime Minister tried to reassure the rebels.
But if we do not reform the system for the future, we will carry on running up very high bills when a lot of people who are severely disabled and who really need the help aren't getting it.
But the silent, worried faces behind him told their own story. In the debate that soon followed, it was the Tories who grinned broadly as Labour ministers argued with Labour backbenchers.
Why are we making disabled people who are unable to work worse off? I cannot understand it.
The honourable gentleman must really not insist in this argument that somehow to increase spending on the most vulnerable, we're removing money from other disabled people. We are not.
People with disabilities say!
Campaigners and Labour rebels wanted to keep the changes made by the Lords, which would have been more generous towards the disabled. The government wants to give more money to the most needy rather than those who've got second pensions. The rebels think that breaches some basic principles.
But these people, rightly in my view, are likely to feel, those who expected more from our government, to feel deeply betrayed when they realise that they're being penalised for putting aside money to help build a nest egg over many years.
Then an extraordinary threat. If the rebels persisted, the government would bulldoze the bill through the Lords, stripped of the latest concessions.
None of the amendments that have been made to this bill at any time in committee stage in this House, report stage in this House, or in the other place would be allowed in a bill put through under the Parliament Act.
Despite that, in a series of votes, the government's majority was slashed. 52 rebels in one vote, 54 in another. They urge the government now to back off.
I've got no doubt whatsoever that the vast majority of my constituents will feel that tonight the House of Commons has delivered a blow for their views on these issues and delivered a blow for democracy. And I cannot believe that the government led by Tony Blair, and I support him. I think he's doing a great job. I think on disability he's been absolutely first class. But on these limited issues, he really must listen.
So the bill will be back in the Lords on Monday, but it comes at a very delicate time, with abolition round the corner and the promise that some hereditary peers can keep their seats dangling carrot-like in front of their lordships. So should they, will they, defy the will of the Commons?
But I've spoken to a number of peers and said, to what extent will the constitutional crisis that we have in terms of the change in the House of Lords affect you? And they have said, not at all. Because this bill, or the provisions of this bill on incapacity benefit are so bad, they're unacceptable. We'll see on Monday if in fact they translate their indignation into votes. Personally, I believe they will.
Welfare reform bill! No way!
Demonstrators outside the Houses of Parliament will look to the as yet untamed second chamber to face down the government. It's possible more concessions may follow, but the government's adamant the principles will not be breached.
Well, the government was given quite a shock by the original rebellion. Since then, negotiations have been held with the rebels, culminating in the concessions announced earlier this week. Disabled people themselves seem distinctly unimpressed. We asked a former rebel MP who switched sides and decided to vote with the government tonight to explain his change of heart to a sufferer of cerebral palsy who will lose his benefit entitlement.
My name's Ben Ferner. I've worked in PR for 12 years, but I'm currently on a career break with Grey Eye Theatre Company. I'm here to meet Tony McWalter to find out why he's voting with the government on the welfare reform proposals.
I'm Tony McWalter. I'm the Member of Parliament for Hemel Hempstead. And when the welfare reform bill first came to Parliament, I didn't support the government. But after many months of negotiation representing the interests of disabled people to the government, they have responded very constructively to our views. And tonight I shall be supporting the government in the welfare reform debate. I was lecturer in philosophy.
Oh, right. Okay. So how long have you been in the Commons?
Just since May the 1st, 1997.
Oh, right. So one of the new intake.
So, where you work at the moment?
Well, just round the corner at Settlers Wells. I think what I'm interested in, Tony, is why it is that you rebelled against the government earlier in the year as far as the welfare reform is concerned. But now it seems that with the concessions that Alistair Darling has made, you'll say, no, this is okay.
When the bill first came out, I said, there are some things within this bill which I don't like and which could well produce unintended damage to my constituents. 90% of what I wanted, the government has delivered on. It would be churlish, irrational even, for me now to say, well, that still isn't good enough.
The changes that have been made in regard to incapacity benefit, for example, which is something that would affect me personally, I've been putting aside money into a retirement pension because this government's been very clear that state benefits aren't going to be able to support me in retirement. And what I discover is that as a result of these proposed reforms, in fact, that money which I've put away for retirement could be taken into account if I need to claim help from the state because I'm too sick or disabled to work. Now that is wrong. I have worked for 12 years, and there are many disabled people in this country who've worked for much longer, paying contributions into a system, and we're now being penalised because we've done what we've told. My fear is, and I'd be really interested in the response to this, that the reforms that are being put forward by Alistair Darling are actually reforms that are driven by budget. They are not being driven by the needs of disabled people.
Well, I certainly don't think that the primary focus is budgetary. And if I thought that, then I wouldn't be willing to support the government this evening. I'm looking at a very, very large package of which is helping and supporting a huge number of people in a large variety of ways.
What are you going to do when your disabled constituents start coming to see you in 2, 3, 4 years' time saying the system's changed, my pension's disappearing? How are you going to manage that? How are you going to deal with that and deal with people's disappointment and feeling of betrayal that results from the government's welfare reforms?
Well, their pension won't be disappearing. They'll be claiming their pension, and that pension will be providing them with the means to live.
That is a technicality. They will be counted as having notional income, so as far as the benefit system is concerned, they'll be assumed that they're having a particular income coming in from their personal or occupational pension.
Well, I don't think it's quite a technicality, because there are a variety of reasons why it would be beneficial to those people to save up for that pension. But I do agree with you that the issue about the clawback rates is important, but it's hardly part of the reason why that's important is related to taxation. And one of the things we're trying to do is to raise taxation levels. But this is not a taxation thresholds. But this is not a finance bill. This is a welfare reform bill.
Well, earlier I spoke to the Social Security Secretary, Alistair Darling, and I asked him first if this bill amounted to a rejection of the principle of universality in benefits.
No, it's not. The benefit system at the moment is a mix of universal benefits and means-tested benefits, targeted benefits. It always has been. What we're doing here is, firstly, we're ensuring that we give far more help to people who lost out in the past. You know, for example, we are increasing the amount of money we give to young, severely disabled people by £26 a week. What we're also doing is making sure the system is brought up to date, reflects the changing world. 50 years ago, less than 30% of people had occupational pensions. Now you find that nearly half the people on incapacity benefit with occupational pensions are in the top half of the income bracket, and it's only right to take that into account.
But you're taking it from people who've already paid for it.
No, we're not. No one is losing out in their benefit entitlement.
But people who have been paying in and making arrangements wisely for their future, people who are in, for example, the grip of a serious illness which they know will render them incapable, have taken precautions and are now to be denied this benefit.
No, they're not. If you pass the medical test, you will get your incapacity benefit the same as now. What we are doing, though, is where people have good private pension provision designed to replace their income if they come out of work early, which is what incapacity benefit was originally designed to do, then after a point, some of that gets taken into account. You know,
but somebody who knows, for example, in a particular case that we've dealt with, somebody who knows that they are going to be rendered incapable within the foreseeable future, 5 or 10 years, has been operating on the assumption that the present rules will continue to apply. Well, he's now to be penalised for that.
No, he's not. Remember, nobody would lose their entitlement to incapacity benefit until their annual income from the early pension exceeded £11,000, and if they were a couple with children, it would be some £18,000. What we're doing here is just accepting the fact, taking account of the fact, that now more and more people do make provision for themselves, and just as in other parts of the social security system, we believe that it's right that individuals and the state should both contribute. Now, I think that that principle is right.
House of Lords opponents of your bill believe that the size of the rebellion today was sufficiently large for them to continue their opposition. What will you do if they block you?
If they can't, if the House of Commons is invited to vote on the matter again, then we will vote in the same way as we voted tonight. And at the end of the day, and there is, you know, it becomes a constitutional matter, if you like, the House of Lords has to accept that we are the elected chamber. And I think the majority of people, and indeed, you know, Jack Ashley himself has been very complimentary about large parts of this bill. We want to get this major piece of welfare reform onto the statute book.
Would you, for example, consider removing the concessions you've made over entitlement?
I've made the concessions. I believe they were the right thing to do. They weren't a negotiating ploy, they were the right thing to do, so they will stay. What I'm now saying to the House of Lords is, look, here is a bill that I believe is improved. It's been revised by both houses. The House of Commons has considered what the House of Lords has got to say, which is our constitutional duty, but we are the elected chamber at the end of the day. The government was elected to reform the welfare state. This is an important piece of legislation, and I hope that a majority of peers accept that position. They've done their job, we've done ours. Most people now want to see what is a very good bill onto the statute book.
And Lord Morris, former Minister for the Disabled and one of the leaders of the rebels in the House of Lords, is with us now. What are you going to do next?
The debate will be on Monday. We're looking at the treatment by the Commons of our changes to the bill. We'll debate the issue again. In my view, the government has not gone far enough, and the government is very likely to be defeated.
Don't you accept the principle that it is a democratically elected government?
I was in the House of Commons elected by the same constituency for 33 years. I do accept that the legitimacy, democratic legitimacy, is with the Commons. There's no moral right of peers, but there is, as the Constitution stands, a duty there to scrutinise legislation.
To scrutinise, but once the democratically elected government has made its will clear and got its way, in this case more than once, who are you to stand in their way?
That's an argument for unicameralism. I'm quite certain that if you went to the democratically elected chamber, you'd find that there are very few advocates of unicameralism.
But who are you,
if the debate is a constitutional one, I'm with you. I'm not in favour of hereditary principle. I don't want a non-elected second chamber.
Look, it's not even a question of hereditary peers. You're not elected. You are a life peer, aren't you?
I'm a life peer.
And regardless of whether it's possible, with or without the hereditaries, to reject this piece of legislation, you are obstructing the will of a democratically elected government if you try to do so.
We're asked by the government to look for a second time at legislation that's gone through. Most of the amendments, a vast number of amendments, are government amendments that were carried in the Lords. Only 8 amendments were carried against the wishes of the government. That's a very small number of them. So if the bill had become law before it came to the House of Lords, in the government's view, not mine, not that of the House of Lords, it would have been a bill with gaping holes, all kinds of correctable errors.
There were 50-odd members of your own party in the House of Commons who decided to share your view today. The government had a thumping majority. It has a massive popular mandate. Who are you to obstruct it?
I'm someone who is asked at the present time to scrutinise legislation. I could say, well, forget it. This is an imperfect chamber. I say it's a perfect chamber. That's why I've been working to change the composition of the House of Lords and want to change it further.
Would you rather the bill fell, disappeared completely, than went through in its present form?
I think Alistair Darling would have been very concerned if the Lord's amendment had not been with the Commons today. He took pride in announcing today that it increased from £50 to £85, the threshold for clawback. He took pride in saying that it increased from 2 years to 3 years.
So you've got an improvement in it. Is it worth passing in its present form?
Well, he thought so.
No, I'm asking you whether you think it's worth passing.
Well, I doubt whether. My background, as you know, is that the first Minister for Disabled.
Absolutely.
I've been a Labour frontbencher for 23 consecutive years in government and opposition. My commitment to disability is one that tells me that I ought to be a candid friend at the present time.
So it is not worth passing in its present form?
No, I think it needs improving.
Lord Morris, thank you very much. The man who was the Interior Minister of East Germany was fulminating today at plans for next week's 10th anniversary celebration of the tearing down of the Berlin Wall. He claims the whole event is being orchestrated for the benefit of West Germans, deliberately ignoring the part played by Easterners. The complaint is typical of the inferiority complex of many Easterners. Of all the countries to be liberated by the fall of communism, East Germany was the only one to have a mirror image of itself in the West, to remind itself how things might be. Yet now there's an increasing habit of looking back in the East to the good old days. Alenka Frankel, who covered the fall of the wall for Newsnight, has been there to find out why.
Oh, those wild and wacky days in East Berlin. That crazy wall, those dear old border guards. According to Sonnenallee, the latest film sweeping Germany, if you were young and in love, even in the GDR, life was sweet.
Die 70er Jahre, das ist eine ganz spezielle Zeit gewesen. Das war auch die Zeit...
The 70s were a really special time. It was the time when pop and youth culture grew in power. It was a very naive and innocent time, and that brought together both East and West, and even the world. It was a time of discovery for us, and I firmly believe it was the most beautiful time of my life. Not the dictatorship itself, but I still had the time of my life.
Die Diktatur vielleicht nicht, aber meine Zeit war sehr schön.
Not everyone remembers it quite that way. Joachim Kretschel too grew up next to the wall. He hated it and eventually risked death to escape.
Now the people try to say, well, we felt so nice in East Germany. They never felt nice, but they lie, and they don't want to remember what East Germany meant, really.
So it's a false memory syndrome?
Yeah. It's a falsification of the memory. It's really strange, yeah.
Joachim's father, Werner Kretschel, a Lutheran minister, emerged as a key opposition figure in the days before the wall was breached. Today, he says, there are many versions of the truth.
It is a main task in Germany today to find a good balance between forgetting something, sometimes forgiving something, and to show the past in his bad and brutal and anti-movements against freedom and so on.
This is how I remember Berlin on November the 9th, 10 years ago. Between me here and the Berlin Wall was the Brandenburg Gate and a line of armed guards defending what was known as the Dead Land, where people couldn't go. But what was astonishing was that a small group of people were walking up towards the line and through it, past it, towards the wall. Normally they'd have been shot for that, but that night the guards did nothing. They just stood there, impassive, immobile, like waxworks. Eventually they filed meekly away. It was so clearly a turning point in history. Everyone was elated. This is the East. Over there is the West. I'm standing, along with several thousand other people tonight, on the Berlin Wall. But this may be another false memory. Many of those on the wall that night were from the West, not the East. Of course, crowds of East Germans rushed to visit the West for the first time after 28 years imprisoned in their country. But what looked on the surface just like the mass uprising against communism that had started decades before in Poland, Hungary and Czechoslovakia, was here in East Germany something quite different. That day, when I met students of English at East Berlin's Humboldt University, I thought they'd be thrilled. They weren't.
I consider it a very panic reaction of our government, and I consider it a mistake. In general, I think it's right to open the wall and it's right to let people travel, but our government should have been a bit more prepared.
I was really confused. It was really strange. People were crazy, I think.
Their English teacher, Peter Lucko, a member of the Communist Party, was groping still for ways to save the system.
What we need is a system, a constitution, and legal provisions that make it possible to check and control the government, and not just to trust it.
No one yet in the East was talking of an end to communism or the GDR, not even the most prominent opposition leader, Jens Reich. This is what he said that night on Newsnight.
Do any of you want a real market economy, real free enterprise, real Western capitalist political experience?
I think if it comes to a serious choice, everybody will think twice before giving up what we have here from as socialist achievements.
The old Communist Party soon relaunched itself with remarkable ease as the PDS. Its new leader, Gregor Gysi, adapted to the hustings with flair. And today, the PDS has a powerful hold on politics in the East, often pushing the SPD, the government's party, into third place. That Marxist bastion, Humboldt University, has survived the changes pretty well intact. I see the wise words of Karl Marx are still on the wall, this time with a preservation order. And while some departments were purged, Peter Lucko is still Professor of English, though he says it's been a hard 10 years.
You had the impression that some people in the West thought they had to teach us how to use knives and forks. I had to apply for a professorship here, so we all didn't have jobs any longer. Every professorship was announced in the papers, and so we had to apply against competition from the West, from England and so on.
Antje remembers how her mother, a school teacher, was made to feel humiliated.
After the wall came down, they told her that the qualification that she acquired in East Germany was no good because there was no equivalent in the West. So they told her to go back to university, and even though she personally enjoyed that time, for a lot of her colleagues this was a burden, and a lot of those teachers thought that this was a humiliating experience. Because if you tell somebody that the qualification they acquired years ago is no good, you also deny them their past.
That kind of treatment was a gift for the PDS back in 1989, and today, according to Astrid, it's they who stoke up nostalgia for the good old days of the GDR.
I think what we see now is a reconstruction of the GDR as it has never existed. That has helped the PDS to find more voters and also to find more younger voters. But for me, I just cannot understand it, because I think that PDS is the party who governed the country for for almost 40 years, and they're basically the same people. They like their role as a victim party, so to say, the East Germans as the victims of reunification.
It's only when you leave this city and travel deep into the old East Germany that you begin to get a sense of what this strange nostalgia is really all about. So I'm heading south to Chemnitz, which 10 years ago still revelled in the name of Karl Marxstadt. Unemployment has soared since unification. In Chemnitz, it's 17%, though much of the industry here was so obsolete, it's hard to see how those jobs could have survived. The city may have changed its name, but the statue of Karl Marx has been preserved by popular demand, and the council is now run by a coalition in which the PDS, with 27% of the vote, are unofficial partners. At the PDS headquarters, a group of loyal party supporters told me what they miss most from the old days.
Also ich denke, die DDR war eine sehr solidarische Gemeinschaft.
The GDR was a society based on solidarity. We had clubs for everything. People were really there for each other. And now, individuality is king. And that has really shocked many of us. In the old days, you could leave your key with a neighbour, and old people were helped with their shopping.
You say it was a society of solidarity, and yet everybody was informing on everybody else. They were spying on everybody else and giving information to the Stasi about everybody else. Was that really a solidarity?
The majority of the population didn't feel they were being spied on.
Well, ganz ehrlich, Sie müssen mir die vielen...
Show me the thousands who suffered. Maybe there were 15,000 who suffered. But the rest of us, millions of us, I didn't suffer. I had work. My wife had work. We had a flat. We were cared for from cradle to grave. We were totally secure.
The old machine tool factories, once the pride of the city, today lie derelict. Manfred Hasted was one of those protesting 10 years ago. A member of the Green Party, which has done dismally in the east, he's dismayed that no new politics has been born from the wreckage of the old East Germany. The reason, he believes, is that only a tiny elite really wanted any change. There was no revolution.
I'm not sure that the majority really wanted reunification. Mass demonstrations have a dynamic of their own. We know that from the Third Reich. And we have to remember that in the 1989 elections, 90% actually voted for the Communist Party. Vote rigging only accounted for 10% of the vote. So I certainly wonder, did the people really want reunification? Or do we just think they did?
So which is the false memory? For the vast majority who conformed with the system, life wasn't so bad. What galls them today is they're treated as the losers of the Cold War, conquered by clever dicks from the West who still get all the top jobs and treat them all like collaborators. Their industry's gone, and all they have left is to trade on their compromised past. The old communist tourist shop in Chemnitz does a nice line in socialist knickknacks. So which is more popular? The Karl Marx or the Erich Honecker?
If I am honest, the Karl Marx is more popular.
Every person who lived in East Germany had to make compromises, and wrong and false compromises. And these experiences led to a bad conscience and to a shame, and sometimes a kind of solidarity with the communists and the communistic time where all of us became guilty.
At home in his garden outside Berlin, Peter Luckow sorts the rotten apples from the autumn windfall and contemplates the last 10 years.
I've lost my utopia, and sometimes I feel a little bit of shame for well, not having done anything that might have changed the situation, really. But then again, I think about the chances I had as a person. It's very difficult. I've very often thought about that, and I've asked myself, what is my personal guilt in that this experiment, socialism, went wrong so badly.
Does it gnaw away at you? Is it something that you still think about now?
I still think about that, yes. You can't forget about that. I mean, it's been 40 years of my life.
These are painful questions for all Germans examining their history this century. But today, West Germans are judged to have come to terms with their past. But until the East sifts its true memories from the false, it will continue to be seen as the negative mirror image of the West, the repository of Germany's dark underside, the bad Germans.
That report was from Alenka Frankel. Now, in a moment, why is it considered socially acceptable for women to wear skirts, but not men? And that's after a look at today's main news. First, a brief recap on our top story tonight. More than 50 Labour backbenchers have voted against the government in the debate on the government's welfare or reform bill. The rebellion came despite efforts by the Social Security Secretary, Alistair Darling, to persuade his backbenchers to toe the party line. The European Commission has indicated it expects the French ban on British beef to be lifted within 10 days. It says Britain's agreement to further talks was far from a cave-in. In Brussels tonight, there were clear signs that French foot-dragging won't be countenanced, with officials dismissing suggestions of a British climb-down.
The position that was adopted last night was the intelligent, rational, reasonable approach to adopt to this situation, and in my view is far from a cave-in. I believe that, and I hope that my judgment in this will prove to be right, and that within the next 10 days or so we will have a final resolution to this particular problem.
Meanwhile, France's agriculture minister defended his country's stance.
La France n'a pas voulu cette crise, elle ne se complaît pas dans cette crise.
As soon as possible. France did not want this crisis and doesn't take pleasure in it, and it wants out as soon as possible, but not at the price of public health. So we must find extra measures, reinforcements of the system.
The reinforcements to the system, as the French put it, will cover matters such as cattle tracing, testing for BSE and the labelling of British beef products. In London, the Agriculture Minister Nick Brown insisted that a few more days of talks were worth the effort.
If we can get an agreed diplomatic solution, then clearly that would be a great prize for all of us, because that would get the ban lifted speedily. The alternative remedy, the only alternative remedy for us, is through the courts, and that would mean the Commission taking France to court, and clearly that procedure would take time.
The inquiry into heart surgery at Bristol Royal Infirmary has revealed that twice as many children died after operations there than at any other major centre. Analysis of the figures from Bristol show that year after year between 1984 and 1995, more children died during heart surgery here than at any other specialist centre in England. Surgeon James Wishart, seen here operating, and Janardhan Dasmana have already been found guilty of serious professional misconduct. Data from the surgeon shows that there were at least 34 more deaths at Bristol Royal Infirmary than should have been expected if the operations had been done elsewhere.
The risk of mortality was up to twice that existed in the rest of the country. And in small groups of patients having particular operations, that risk went up to even 9 times that which existed in the rest of the country. But the numbers were small in many of the groups of patients, and we have to be very cautious about interpreting those.
This is the largest NHS inquiry ever held and has many more months yet to run. But today's data is another piece of the jigsaw which will eventually explain why the deaths of so many children were not prevented. President Yeltsin has cut short a holiday to have talks with his Prime Minister Vladimir Putin on the deepening crisis in Chechnya. Refugees hoping to leave Chechnya are being stopped at the border by Russian troops, but one or two, like this woman, weakened by a lack of food and water, managed to talk their way across. Thousands of others, though, remain trapped in a 10-mile queue without adequate supplies. Another victim of the Paddington rail crash has died in hospital. Sunny Ha, who was 25 and from London, suffered 70% burns in the accident. Her death brings the number of people who died in last month's crash to 31. 4 others still recovering from burns are said to be in a stable condition. Chelsea have won through to the last 16 of the European Champions Cup after a 2-0 home win against Hertha Berlin. Didier Deschamps opened the scoring for Chelsea in the 11th minute, and the Spanish defender Albufera added another before half-time. But Glasgow Rangers are out of the competition. They conceded a penalty to Bayern Munich and lost their match 1-0. And the markets, the FT 100 share index was up. In New York, the Dow Jones also closed slightly up. The pound rose against the euro and fell slightly against the dollar. MPs have been clambering all over each other today to denounce Eurostar for insisting that its security guards wear skirts. Its female security guards, that is. 2 of them were sent home because they turned up to work in trousers. Yesterday, an employment tribunal heard about an alleged similar trouser phobia at the Professional Golfers Association headquarters in Worcestershire. What is it about trousers and men, or was it really about skirts? Not surprisingly, Debbie Sheen and Lynn Mackay were wearing trousers today. When they tried this 3 weeks ago in their jobs as Eurostar security guards, they were sent home. For them, this was humiliating.
Our job involves body search, a lot of kneeling, bending, stretching, lifting bags, which often you have to put your knee under, which obviously wearing a skirt restricts movement. If there was an incident which required any running or jumping over barriers, obviously wearing a skirt speaks for itself.
Skirts! I love those skirts! They're a big attraction to me. Oh!
Such modern notions aren't to be found everywhere. Some men just like looking at women's legs.
To the music, all that down round your ankles and they're up to your knees. They're a
Sorry, I'm a man. I prefer skirts. I just think women look a lot better in skirts. I mean, don't get me wrong, I like trousers. I think it's horses for courses. Most of the time I prefer to see skirts. Or dresses.
A woman's normally more comfortable in trousers, but I was seeing a customer this morning who's a gentleman, so I thought, right, show the leg, doesn't hurt occasionally, so...
For most of human civilization, of course, everyone wore skirts, or at least something like them. Julius Caesar's tunica would grace the pages of Vogue today. Henry VIII's doublet sported a knee-length gored skirt, opened at the front to display the codpiece. And for Ewan McGregor and many other Scots through the centuries, wearing a kilt has been a matter of national pride. Men have been happy to wear what we now think of as women's clothes. So why are they so sensitive when, so to speak, the boot's on the other foot?
If women are usurping their clothing, they're also trying to take over their roles in life and in our society. And I think it's that aspect that really upset men the most, and not necessarily the sight of women in trousers.
When the writer Georges Sand put her dresses in storage, it was put down to her ambiguous sexuality. Even in this century, early feminists such as Vita Sackville-West were derided for wearing trousers, although the sultry singer Marlene Dietrich made an artistic virtue out of them.
The swinging scene of Royal Ascot. The Duke of Norfolk, who looks after protocol, has forbidden trouser suits in the royal enclosure, but he said nothing at all about hemlines.
The rules have been bent and broken. Strangely, it's that supposedly most radical of decades, the 1960s, with which the skirt is most associated, although that was more about what you weren't wearing than what you were. In some milieux now, the wheel has come full circle, but for every 1,000 women in trousers, there's scarcely one bloke in a skirt. Well, we got one bloke in a skirt here. It's Jasper Conran, the fashion designer, although he would call it a kilt, I think, wouldn't you, Jasper?
I call it a kilt, yes.
And Fiona Ruby, who's the senior fashion editor at Harper's and Queen. Now, what do you make of these employers' rules, then, Jasper Conran?
Nonsense.
Why?
Because it's morally wrong to tell a woman that she should wear a skirt when you're not telling their male counterparts that they should wear skirts too. It is morally incorrect. You're talking about 50% of the workforce of this country, 50% of the taxpayers. Who makes up this idea that a woman should have to wear a skirt?
What do you think of the general guidance that women are better in skirts at work?
Well, I think that women look equally as attractive and equally as feminine if they're wearing a very well cut trouser suit or a very nice pair of trousers with a beautiful shirt on. It doesn't mean that you can only look sexy and feminine if you're wearing a skirt. I think it can be either. I think it depends on the woman, it depends on what suits her.
I don't think we're talking about sexy and feminine, because
but they want them to look sexy and feminine, though,
yes,
don't
but
they? That's the whole point.
Absolutely outrageous.
But that's what I'm saying. I'm saying that if they can look just as
security guards on Eurostar.
Security guards and police women.
They obviously do. That's the thing. They want them to look like female creatures. don't they? That's obviously why they're putting them in
They,
skirts.
they do want them to look like female.
The question is, who's they?
I think Eurostar's defence is that because they're security guards and you know, a woman is about to be frisked, they want to be sure that the woman who's about to be frisked recognises she's going to be frisked by a woman, and they do that. She identifies herself by wearing a skirt. That's their public defence.
Is it?
Yes.
But how do you know that?
No, I think that's
How
ridiculous.
do you know that you're being frisked by a man just because he's wearing trousers? How do you know it's not actually? Do you know? How do you know that he's a man?
Well, no, you're giving the lie to this tonight by wearing a skirt or a kilt rather. Why do you think it hasn't caught on? Skirts for men.
I think that if you went to Scotland and said, "Why do you think it hasn't caught on?" they would say to you, "But it has." You know, it's the Mason-Dixon line.
But not all men.
South of the border, that's considered puffy, but up in Scotland, you've tried telling them it's puffy.
Yeah, but then they're specific skirts, aren't they? They're kilts, which is what you're wearing tonight, which does look wonderful. But I mean, if we look over there.
Oh, yeah, I think for the benefit of our horrified viewers, we have 4 members of the Middlesex University Rugby Club scrum, dressed in various types of skirt. Yes, so go on then.
Well, I think we can see by looking at these boys over here that not all men do look that wonderful in a skirt. And I think tonight Jasper definitely stands out because it actually does suit him. Whereas
well, he's not the only one that's made to measure for one thing.
Well, exactly. I think you have to be very certain.
Oh, you know, I mean, I'm sorry. If you go on holiday and you look now at what men are wearing, they're wearing sarongs. And
well, one of these
because
is
David
wearing
Beckham was wearing a sarong, it's now
become
considered
much more
acceptable.
fashionable. Yeah.
But the principle of the argument is